Afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order for the Coronavirus Ad Hoc Committee for February the 15th, 2024. Ms. Carrillo, if you will, please call the roll.
Paul Livingston.
Here.
Gretchen Barron.
Here.
Keith Newton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Our first order of business is election of chair. I will entertain a motion to open up the floor for nominations at this time.
Madam Chair,
Second. Any opposition or anyone opposed? If none, I do accept. And Ms. Carrillo, if you will, call for the vote.
Barron.
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Livingston.
yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. At this time, I'll take a motion to close the election of the chair.
Move.
Carrillo, if you will, please.
Livingston.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And I'd like to take just an opportunity, a point of privilege, just to thank my colleagues once again for entrusting me to serve as your chair. And I look forward to it. We've got a lot of things accomplished last year and much more for us to continue to do in the year to come. Given that, our next order of business is approval of the minutes from December the 14th, 2021. And you can find those items on pages 2 through 8. Approve. Any discussion or any changes that need to be made? If not, Ms. Carrillo, please.
Livingston.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
This time, our next order of business is adoption of the agenda.
Move, Madam Chair.
Mr. Brown, before we move forward, are there any additions or deletions that we need to take?
No, ma'am, there is not. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
a question. Item 5C, ERP vendor, should that be ERA or is it ERP?
It is related to the ERA, American Rescue Plan funding. So yes, ma'am, you could say ERP or ERA. Okay. Yes, ma'am. It's the same thing.
Just making sure I'm used to enterprise resource planning systems, and
yes,
that wasn't on our agenda. I was confused.
So can we, for clarity, Madam Chair, with that being the same, can we, if we could have a recommendation, change that to ERA? So
I'll move to amend the agenda to change item 5C from ERP vendor to ERA vendor.
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, the motion on the floor is to amend the agenda, adding or making a revision from ERP to ERA. Ms. Carrillo, if you will, please.
Livingston.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Our next order of business is lots of discussion items, and they're actually, I just see another amendment that should have taken place in our agenda. These are actually items for discussion. These are discussion items for action, and I just want to be clear with that. I don't know if I need to do something different to our agenda at this time to make that clear.
I think for the record, we offer this make item. So I'll be happy to move that items 5A through D, that title be listed as action items, be also a part of that topic.
And if we could, Mr. Livingston, just as a friendly amendment, if we could say discussion items for action.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
My question is, when you were adopting the agenda, you asked the administrator if there were any changes, deletions, and he said no. So maybe these are only discussion items and not items for action.
Mr. Brown, could you clarify,
I
please?
can, we discussed them being discussion items for action, because you may decide to take action or not. But I wasn't paying attention to the fact that there was no action language on there. So that is I apologize for not catching that, Madam Chair.
I'll second Mr. Livingston's motion.
Thank you. Ms. Carrillo, please, if we're making an additional amendment to our agenda to make sure that item number 5 states discussion items for action.
Madam Chair, while a technical point, and I know I'm not on the committee, but to do that, you'd actually have to have a motion first to reconsider the agenda and then go back and do that.
So moved.
Second?
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. And so at this time, I'll entertain a motion to amend the agenda to include item number 5 to state items for action.
So move, Madam Chair.
Second.
Discussion. None? Ms. Carrillo?
Livingston,
Yes.
Newton,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, now we can get down to business here. So with that, the first item, 5A, is our management software. Those items can be found on page 9 through 10. Mr. Brown, if you will, please.
Yes, ma'am. Briefly, I just want to point out on page 9 of the recommended agenda of the attached document, it says staff recommends approval of the motion to allocate $687,949 in American Rescue Plan funds and other applicable federal grant funding sources to purchase comprehensive grant management software to facilitate the process of distributing, tracking, and processing both grants and funds received and distributed. And what I'll do, if you don't mind, I'll have ACA Jensen, who's oversees many of the grant funds associated with Richland County, explain why we're making this request for the committee.
Madam Chair.
No.
I hate to interrupt you again, but while it says staff recommends approval of a motion, maybe there's different wording that needs to be there, because when you go down to motion of origin, it says there is no associated council motion. So what is it that we're approving or you're considering?
This item is not from a council action. This is a request that is coming associated with the spending of American Rescue Plan dollars. So county council did not send a motion down to address this. This is literally coming from a requester, in this case, your
So
staff.
it's approval of a request?
Yes, sir, from the staff.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Jensen?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. Very briefly, Mr. Brown gave perfect summary there. We have discussed this with council in the past, but there is a need for a single software platform for the administration of grant funds. And right now we have 3 different platforms and they don't necessarily talk to each other. And so sometimes we have to re-enter information in, which always puts us at risk for errors and it's simply just inefficient. And so we would request of this body and of the council ultimately to approve this amount of money for the purchase of software. We are looking at 2 different packages. We're looking at eCivis and Amplifund. They are essentially the only 2 vendors out there that offer this particular software. This software would be used essentially by all departments except for finance. The information would be transferred across to finance so that there's no potential for someone using this software to get into our financial records. So but again, this could use everything from folks would be able to do applications online. Our staff would get that information. They'd be able to process those applications and then to act upon them. So it'd be everything from grant monies we receive to grant monies we distribute to pass through to everything would go through one single software platform. So it is our recommendation that they allocate the $687,949 over a period of 5 years for this software, or for one of the two, whichever one ultimately comes out to be the best for Richland County.
Any questions from the committee? Ms. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Jensen. A few questions about the software.
Yes.
First is, whichever package that you purchased, based on your estimates, when would this be implemented and usable by staff?
Approximately 3 months from the time that we finished the contract. So assuming that we were able to, we got through the committee today and we went to council in March, effectively April would be the start date to work with the vendor, and it would take 3 months from that point to go live.
And then just trying to understand the total life cycle cost. So it appears to me from looking at this that the $687,000 and change would be paying these year 1 through year 5 costs that are listed on page 10 of our agenda. What happens after year 5? Are you thinking you'll discontinue the software, that you'll pay for maintenance out of some other fund? What happens then?
Correct. So we would have to identify funds in year 4 to continue to use the software. We anticipate this will be something that will be ongoing indefinitely, whether it's this package or something else. We're already paying for software for other software, and so this is just replacing a cost that we already have. But instead of paying 3 different vendors, we would just pay a single vendor.
Gotcha. And then just from my reference, I'm sure that the only reason that you're bringing this to us is because it's allowed to be paid for out of the ARP funds. I'm curious to know what bucket of funding or what category this expense is allowable under.
Sure. This essentially is under administration in the sense that, the vast majority, or not the vast majority, but a significant amount of the grants that we are receiving right now are either disaster relief or emergency relief of some kind or another, whether it's rental assistance, and so this software could be used for basically any grant programs we administer, but, we have such a large amount of federal funds that are coming through right now. We feel it appropriate that it be paid for with grant money, since that's what we're administering.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Malinowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Has anybody had any discussions with our IT department on this? Because I didn't see it here.
Absolutely, yes. So we have an internal team who's working on this, which includes IT, the finance department, the budget department, community development grants, emergency services. Pretty much everybody who has a grant of some form or another, including IT, is involved on that working team.
Okay, and on your chart on page 10 that Councilwoman Newton referred to, is there any reason why we would not use the American Rescue Plan funds completely for years 2 and 3? I don't know why we're paying more in year 4 and 5 and wouldn't throw the higher amount into years 2 and 3 for the plan to cover.
So we are requesting that all 5 years be paid with the American Rescue Plan fund.
All 5 years.
All 5 years, yes, sir.
I thought I heard you say that after year 4, we'd start incurring a cost.
No, after year 4, we would need to start discussing in that year's budget for the year. In other words, once the money's expended, we need to the year prior start determining where those funds are going to come from.
Any idea what that cost will be?
It will probably be roughly 3% more than the year 5 cost. So it's $137,000 plus another 3%. That's kind of what they've said will be the yearly increase.
And I guess these would just come from the general fund budget?
Correct. It would come from the same low sources where we're paying for the 3 different platforms we have right now.
Then, what we're paying now annually for those, because it may reduce this to a 0, wouldn't it? I don't know.
It possibly could. Yes, I know. The only one I know with a surety is what we're paying for the neighborly software, which CD uses, which is in the $30,000 range yearly. But what the other different departments are using, I couldn't tell you that number right off the head.
They'll more than likely reduce that figure for year 5 by taking funds we're already expending.
Correct. Year 6. In year 6, I anticipate that we would effectively go back to the same funding sources that we're currently paying for software.
Thank you, sir.
So I do have a question kind of on the lines of where Mr. Malinowski left off. And it is what I hear you saying, and I'm hoping I'm taking what you said.
Okay.
This would be a cost savings for the county for us to take all of these programs that we have spread out throughout the county and to consolidate where everyone would be using this same software. Would that be the case? So we would be eliminating all the softwares that maybe OBO is using and, you know, everywhere there are grants out there. We'd all be using the same system.
Correct. Thank you. Yes, the all folks who are related to grants would be using this same software so that there would not be duplicate inputting of data. There would not be the potential for loss. So whether or not, you know, I cannot say that there will be a cost savings, but I can say that there will be efficiencies gained and there will be less chance of error by only entering data once into the system.
Well, it'll be my thought that if you can save us an error, that within itself is a cost savings.
Yeah.
So it would be my opinion of that. Any further discussion?
Oh, efficiency is cost saving, yeah.
It is all day long.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? So this is, Mr. Brown, you need some action to be given on this one. This one needs to go to full council for approval.
Yes, Madam Chair, that would be our request.
So I'll entertain a motion at this
Approve the
time.
recommendation to county, for council.
Second?
Any further discussion on this matter? If not, Ms. Carrillo, please.
Newton,
Yes?
Livingston,
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Our next item is a request that we've received from the Solicitor's Office, and it is for the Solicitor Data Management System. Those items are found on pages 11 through 37. We do have a representative who is on the call. Mr. Pauling is on the call to represent the Solicitor's Office and to provide us with a brief overview of this project that's being submitted to this committee.
Yes.
Mr. Pauling, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you very much. We have a need for a new upgraded data system. Our current system, Spartan, I think we purchased in maybe 2009 or early 2010. We looked at two different newer systems, one called Carpel, references KPD, and the other one called Matrix. They're being used by different circuits around the state and around the country. We're working with Innovative Prosecution Solutions. It's a national group that helps prosecutors' offices find updated systems to help with, obviously, efficiencies that you were just talking about. The main focus for us is to try to get the most out of the people that we have here and what they can do. Our current system is somewhat antiquated and it does require a lot of workarounds, which obviously can cause mistakes. And in the criminal justice system, we know we don't really want to have those. We did estimate going out 5 years at a cost, I think, of a little over 1.2 million. As far as cost after 5 years, we're going to have an annual subscription cost, which we would estimate to be probably between $140,000 and $150,000. But the other cost that we don't have a handle on, or at least we can't compute right now, is our cloud storage cost. Because unlike the grant request that you just heard, we're required by statute to retain some of our records, almost all of our trial records and all of our discovery for a certain amount of time. And we can actually go through and cleanse or purge that data material so we don't have to store it for longer than a certain amount of years. But again, we can't really anticipate how much the cloud storage is going to cost 5 years from now. But it could be very expensive, but we don't know. But at the same time, we may have someone on the payroll that that's what they do. They just purge the data every month so we can keep the cloud storage to a minimum. We're getting a lot of videos from law enforcement The Sheriff's Department, they have evidence.com, so we don't have to hold that in our database, which really helps. But we do get a lot of information. I'm always shocked at how much stuff comes into the office on a regular basis. And we've just exceeded the capacity of Spartan, which is what we currently use. Spartan's subscription rate is, I think, $55,000 a year. So it's a significant increase going forward, but we're looking at a 5-year request under American Rescue Plan. And then after that, we would then have to try to get an increase in the Solicitor's Office budget to continue to manage that program. It is software-based, so we could update as we go, the same with the grant software. And of course, the Solicitor's Office also applies for lots of grants. So we are excited about what the proposal that just came ahead of you. We think that'll be very helpful. And I'm certainly available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Paulin. I'd like to start just with the first question for you, and that would be, the Solicitor's Office does serve multiple counties. So as the Solicitor's Office serves multiple counties, has this cost, or does this cost reflect only those employees serving Richland County?
Yeah, with respect to the Kershaw and Richland, we would look at an 80% and 20% cost split based on the current pending case numbers that exist in both counties. And that's been fairly consistent for many years. So that would be the cost analysis we would use when, certainly if we approached Richland after a 5-year period about going forward on subscription costs or cloud storage.
But this $1.2 million, does it reflect a cost split at this time?
No, this 1.2 million, I believe, represents what we estimated for the full 5 years. So if it was 80% of 1.2, that would be the Richland portion.
So, and I just want to be clear, what you presented, the 1.2 is just the full cost. You have not backed out that 20% at this time.
No, and I think the Richland County Finance Department contacted us about 2 weeks ago, and we went ahead and I think gave them a number that was reflective of that, because they had asked us if there was a difference. And I want to say it was probably only going to be $785,000 out of the 1.2, but I'd have to do my math real quick.
I think that would, for me, I would like to have clarity as to what is Richland County's portion from here. But I will, I'll hush at this moment and just open it up for any of my other colleagues at this time. Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess my first question is not really a question. I guess it's a comment for this body, just following up on a conversation that you and I had, because when I saw the agenda, one of my questions was, how is it that this matter is before us as we look at it not originating from a council member? We have many agencies, we have many departments, and I think that it could be quite chaotic if anyone can present any request at any time. And I know that I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but our funds aren't inexhaustible. And so I want to make sure that there's some order in terms of how we're doing this, or we're going to turn around having said yes, inch by inch, and then not have funds left to handle our strategic items. And so thank you for discussing that with me today, Ms. Barron, and I'll let you address it however you feel you need to. But my understanding was that until we have a process for fairness, these organizations are allowed to bring it to us. But I guess I'm just saying this to urge us to have whatever that process is going to be, because again, just having anybody able to get a request this substantial on our agenda is a little bit troublesome to me. So that's my comment. I do have a question, but since I addressed you, I don't know if there's anything you want to say before I make my question.
Yeah, so, but we will, this is a topic that we will have some conversation about a little later in the agenda, but I will defer to Mr. Brown at this moment to speak to this.
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Newton, the simple response is that this is one of our local elected officials. And anytime a committee has a meeting or there's an item that comes before council, if it's one of our elected officials, then we present that information from the elected official to the appropriate body. So that's how this item got to you without coming through another council action or something like that.
And that's helpful, and I appreciate knowing that and having that standard piece, because like I said, I was just like, I wasn't expecting to see this here, so thank you for that. Ms. Barron, is there anything else you want to say before I ask my question? Please. All right, then I have just two questions. I know that we talked about what might be a Kershaw County portion, and so that's some information that you're going to get, and we can discuss that when it comes back before us. I was just curious, I know that we're looking at the ARP funds, but are there other sources of funding, whether it's grants or other organizations outside of Kershaw County that you're also pursuing for this software?
Yes, just to answer the question, on the Kershaw side, we would be looking at $240,000 from them regarding the 5 years. The other source of money we have is a technology grant that we applied, which is up to $340,000. And that is the group Innovative Prosecution Solutions that we're working with. We've also, I think there's 2 or 3 members of the Richland County IT team that have joined us on 2 calls. We actually have another call, I think tomorrow at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So it's an ongoing process. And the turnaround on this is actually pretty long. It'll take us 12 to 18 months maybe for a conversion, because we have to run both systems at the same time so we can move everything over. So it's a commitment, obviously, not just by Richland County, but also by the Solicitor's Office and all the people that work here. It's going to be
Thank you. And then my other question is, you mentioned in your briefing document that the current system that you have doesn't interface with the Richland County Sheriff's Department, if I read it correctly. So I just wanted to ask or confirm that if purchased, this new system would interface with the Richland County Sheriff's Department and any other appropriate bodies that you need.
Yeah, in March of 2019, the Sheriff's Department got a new data system, and we lost our interface at that time. So we've seen the problems with the lack of communication regarding delays. And yes, this particular system, Carpel, KDP, or the Matrix system, which was the more expensive other option, they both have the ability to integrate, and we can set up the communications between the systems. And obviously, yes, we have Richland County Sheriff's Department and some other law enforcement agencies that we would connect with. And whether it's a read-only or the ability to pull down and draw down information from their database is really, really what we're looking for, because we're trying to find ways to make justice both swift and efficient and fair. And yeah, we're looking to modernize quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions from the committee members? If not, I'll recognize Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Based on what was just said, I would like to see, you mentioned that there are some other entities that you will connect with and need to find out legally what can be gotten or not gotten from those entities. I would like to see that put in front of us so we know who else is getting involved with this. And if then there's any additional cost to become involved with the other agencies like the Sheriff's Department, and what information you can get. What else I would like to know is, all that's stated here is that pandemic has had a massive effect on Richland and Kershaw counties' diversion program revenue. Could we get a definition or explanation of what is this diversion program?
Yes, sir, Councilman. Our diversion program revenues are pretrial intervention, alcohol treatment, drug treatment, our treatment courts in general, traffic enforcement program, our traffic education program, and the juvenile PTI. So over the last 3 years, our revenues in those programs have dropped from about 740,000 down to 480,000. So we've seen a big drop. We operate basically through the mail during the coronavirus and the pandemic shutdown. So we never stopped operations, but because all the court systems are now backed up significantly, we don't get the same inflow that we had prior to the pandemic. And so we have seen a reduction in those revenues for the program offerings we make to the community in both counties.
Okay, and I'm thinking, sir, that this is an area like crime that we'd like to see be reduced. And so if it is being reduced, I would think that we don't need the same amount of staff or expenses to continue to man the program. I think that would be a good thing to reduce all these problems we have there. You gave us some different figures than what was in our packet here also. You said 740 to 480, but ours shows, well, it's close enough, never mind. It's within a few thousand.
Yeah.
But, where do the funds, I guess you said it already, after 5 years, the funds will have to come from an increased budget. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's true, because Spartan is currently budgeted in the county. I want to say maybe it's 50,000 a year or 55,000. These programs, whether it's Carpel or Matrix, and I believe we would go with Carpel, we'd be looking at anywhere from 140 to 150,000, and that may also include additions on cloud storage. So it's definitely a more expensive system after the 5-year period. We were estimating the transitional costs, the conversion. And you asked also, Councilman, about these, quote, other entities. I was talking about agencies. They connect within the transition, and we don't pay additional costs. That's all included in that first year to 2 years where we're moving into the system. And we connect with law enforcement agencies like Benedict College or University of South Carolina, Richland County Sheriff's Department, City of Columbia. So they all would come in, and we would be able to access their material, which obviously saves a lot of time, but also saves the possibility of making errors when it comes to evidence and other things.
Okay, you also indicated there were 2 companies that you requested detailed quotes from, and you haven't received a response from one of them. When were these requests sent out to each of these 2?
We started working on this last year, actually. And we got an updated request quote from Carpel. I know that Matrix is more expensive because I know the people that have worked in those circuits and work with that product. So we would estimate they would be $30,000 to $40,000 more per year. And that's why Carpel seems to be the more popular transition program for a lot of prosecution offices, because it's very up to date, it's very modern, but it's the less costly alternative. I'd rather drive a Chevy than a Cadillac kind of thing, and you still get the same bang for your buck.
And it's providing you the same service, correct?
Yeah, the biggest difference is Matrix is a web-based program, and Carpel is a software-based program.
Okay, in one of the informational pages from Carpel under the client services, you indicated, or it indicated they did, for as long as you maintain a support contract, you'll have access to these following services. Is that the cost that's shown in our agenda in that on page 15 where you have different items and it says annual support for 5 years? Is that the same support contract they're referring to?
Well, we will have a subscription support after that regardless. So every year, just like with any other data service, we would be paying a prescription rate and they would be available to aid our office. And the reason we like the software base is because we can actually make changes that are specific to the Richland County Solicitor's Office or the Fifth Circuit Solicitor's Office. We don't necessarily have to have a blanket package that we can't work with. We can actually tweak it and make it a little more useful for what we need. And a lot of that does have to do with data-driven items now and trying to save, like you said before, if we're doing less, do we need the same number of people? In the divergent side, we have not replaced people. So when people left, we just kept the work going with who we had. And on the prosecutor side, we're looking for more people on the prosecution side because there's just so much more work that we have to do. And it's all come in the last 2.5 years during the pandemic.
And I'm a little confused about some of the prices here because on page 31 of our agenda, when you have your first year cost of $583,000. If you add in all your optional items, you come up with $666,000 plus. Yet on page 15, we have a total price of $1.2 million. So I don't know where the other 580-some thousand is coming from, because it's not in this itemized section that we've been provided.
Yeah, so, Councilman.
And go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. On page 15, I already talked about the cloud storage, which is the fourth item down. It says totals year 1 to 5, and it had estimated $380,000. So the cloud storage is probably the one area that, as an office, we may not be able to itemize out front because we don't know the significant amount of data that's going to have to be stored. But then we also have to look at the back end of these cases. Once they're closed, if nobody does an appeal on a case, if it's time served or fine or whatever, we should be purging those cases. I mean, we pay for storage right now on hard files at Iron Mountain. So moving away from that, we save on that storage cost at Iron Mountain, but we'll have cloud storage. And that cloud storage will have to be monitored very carefully every month. We'll have to go and clean it out and get rid of stuff. So that's why you see that big number, $380,000, but that's also included in that 1.2 for the first 5.
Even if I add that 380,000 to these figures that are on our pages, the pricing proposal is what I'm referring to. If I add that in there, we're still almost $300,000, $280,000 difference. So I'd like to see some explanation of that when we get answers to many of these questions. And you just mentioned that we're paying for Iron Mountain storage, and I'm guessing from what you said that if we're not going to necessarily be paying for all that storage at Iron Mountain because we're doing cloud storage, I'd like to see a dollar amount that we will be saving by not storing it over at Iron Mountain.
Yeah, we and that's not a problem because we only have to keep certain files for like forever. A lot of the files we're only required under statute to keep for 40 months. So we've already started to try to reduce those costs over the last 3 years since Solicitor Gibson came into office.
Okay, and on another page from Carpel, it indicates notices, and it lists several different items of caution, I guess I would say, where it says Internet Explorer 11 may have issues after January 2020 running certain programs. Have all these been taken into consideration so we're not going to wind up later on getting another bill saying, well, because this changed from A to B, we now have to pay more money?
Yeah, well, with respect to them giving us a heads up or a warning about certain browsers, I agree with the Internet Explorer issue. Most of us now will use Chrome or Firefox or something better than that, just because of the limitations, especially if you're using Microsoft Word and other data systems. With respect to Carpel, the biggest thing is we're going to see a larger volume of information moving through the county's data systems on a regular basis. So right now we hold a lot of videos in a disk, on a disk format. So what happens if we start to upload those into our new database and we have to go on the cloud? Then the volume, just like water through a hose, we're going to see more of that. And there may be some upgrades that are required so we get the full use out of the new system. I'm not going to lie about that. That's just technology. That's the future, right? So if you're on 3G and you need to stream a series, you got to go to 5G. And that may be something as a whole county needs to be discussed with all of our departments, because we're all going to be in the same boat regardless at some point. Just the data system and the requirements are going to be increased. So I can't tell you, Councilman, that there would not be some other cost increase connected to a new data system, because I'm sure there would be. I'm just letting you know what we know right now up front, what we estimate as a 5-year cost. And then at least for the years after that, I know the basic subscription cost and what that's going to be. And I couldn't tell you what the cloud storage would cost, but I would imagine it's probably another 15.
I have 2 more questions. I'm just going to throw them out there. You can give us
Yes,
answers later. I don't want to take up any more of the committee time. They've got other items on the agenda.
Yes, sir.
It's on page 30 of our agenda. At the bottom, it says estimated travel expenses, 28,600. I'd like that explained a little more in detail why we're paying a company that we're paying to use their product for travel expenses. And number two, I would go back to page 15 where you have the items, and second one from the bottom says annual support for 5 years is $10,000. Yet on page 30, it says annual support services, and there's an itemized listing there that totals a little over 103,000. I think we need some clarification because it's a long way from 10 grand to 103 grand, and you can give those later. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank,
I appreciate it. Thank you.
thank you. So, Mr. Paulin, we have lots of questions here, as you can see. And I just want to add to your list, if you can, when you're giving us an update in the future, if you would provide us with actual, as close as possible, true costs, because I've heard today of some possible grants that could be
Yes,
used to supplement this project. I've heard a little talk about Kershaw County perhaps putting in, but what we currently have is a full ask. So if you can answer the questions that the committee has asked today and provide us with an update answering those questions, as well as true cost, or as close as possible to what this cost is to Richland County.
Yes,
That's going to be critically important, because right now my oldest son he wants a Dodge Charger, but I believe he should drive a Kia, you know. So we got to make sure that we're not getting Dodge Charger and we're not ready for it.
yes, ma'am.
So if you will, just get those questions back to us. I'd like to keep this in committee for some further discussion. Mr. Malinowski, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to say that your attachment 1, sir, is exactly the same as what we read on pages 12 through 14. I don't know about you, but I don't need to read any more, especially if it's duplicate info. So maybe that's part of your example of inefficiency, but we don't need duplication on these, please. Thank you.
So, Mr. Pollen, we thank you for coming before the committee. If you will address those items for us, and we're going to hold this here in committee just for some more information before we move forward with this item.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to move along. We've got a little more than 15 minutes to take care of items C and D. So Mr. Brown, if you will, ERA vendor on page 38 through 46.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program is what we're talking about with this particular item. As you are well aware of, the county has previously received funding for emergency rental assistance in 2 pots, ERA 1 and ERA 2. We successfully distributed those and were qualified to receive additional funding. We requested funding from the Treasury. We requested funding also from one of our sister agencies, this be SE Housing. And as we understand it, those requests have been approved and we are awaiting funding from the U.S. Treasury. The anticipation of receiving those funds, we want to make sure that when we get them, that we are ready to move forward with the program and getting funds back out to the community like we did the first time. So what we're trying to do right now is come to the committee and have a discussion that we believe that the best step forward in order to be able to get these funds back out readily is to continue to utilize our previous vendor that served with us through our first process, and that vendor was Tetra Tech. And so that's what we're coming to the committee to discuss. We believe that that's the quickest and fastest way, and that's our recommendation. There are certainly other options, but we believe that those other options will delay our ability to get the funding out once we receive the funds. So that is the request from staff, is to approve the utilization of Tetra Tech as our vendor for the distribution of ERA 1 funds that we will receive or that we're planning to receive from the U.S. Treasury at some point in time in the near future.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston?
I'd like to move to support the staff recommendation to utilize Tetra Tech for the additional funding we're looking forward to getting.
Second?
Any discussion? Ms. Newton?
Just quickly, first, I'd like to thank Director Jensen, ACA Jensen, who spent some time answering my questions that I had about this morning, who was extremely helpful. I know that we're going to do it, but I would just ask, my understanding is based on the funds that we're receiving, we're not able to reopen the application process, that instead we're going to be following up with persons who've already applied. Just that once we have the money, that we are as efficient and expeditious in our communication with those people as possible. I do have some other questions that I can ask later, but most of the ones that I have were answered this morning by Mr. Jensen.
And I'd like to thank the administrator for answering my questions yesterday, and I'm good to go. Thank you, sir.
That's what I'm talking about. Let's get it done before we get here. Get all the questions answered. Any further discussion? If not, Ms. Carrillo, if you will, please call the vote for the staff recommendation.
Yes.
Barron,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 5D, and we can, Mr. Brown, we can cover them as you please under the nonprofit application process.
Yes, ma'am. So I'll try to be quick, but be clear. So one of the things that Ms. Newton actually brought up, we have been discussing with Ms. Barron previously and recently. And one is a process in which applications can be received to the county for individuals who are, I say individuals, entities and interested parties who are trying to receive requests from Richland County as it relates to the distribution of American Rescue Plan dollars. Part of that potential discussion was on a large scale, we believe that, so first of all, what you have in your, if this was passed out to you or you got a part of your amended agenda, this draft application, grant application, we know that we've talked in the past about making sure that individuals can quickly and readily access these funds from Richland County. Want to just remind everybody that subrecipients and recipients of American Rescue Plan dollars have more stringent reporting requirements than Richland County if we were just giving funds and we wanted to make things really quickly available. So we won't be able to, we have to have all the information that we need to be accountable for the dollars. Let me say it that way. So we can work with people and we can try to make it easy to access the information, but we need the information that we need in order to be compliant with our federal utilization of these funds. So the application process that we kind of have before you is a opportunity for us to allow folks who are interested in funds to complete this process. The thought is two-pronged. One, for a larger request, Ms. Newton, I'm just speaking to you because you mentioned this question earlier, is for things like larger sums of funds, let's just say $1 million plus, as an example. Those individuals, we think, would be focused and aligned with going through this process, and potentially the committee and county council could establish a committee which would then vet those utilizing some of those survey data that you got back. So, for example, your items of consideration were your abused and neglected children, street improvements, mental health, support services, transitional housing, emergency sheltering, permanent housing, broadband infrastructure. Those were some of your larger areas. So ideally, those are big asks that you're looking to address, and you're looking to prioritize what information you receive from the community about what they thought was most important. You could have that committee review those requests that have come into the county through the application process, and then make a recommendation to the body as to how you should distribute those funds. The other thought is, on a smaller scale, you could specifically set aside a portion of funds that you would open up for, let's just say, nonprofits or small businesses to access, so that they could then have a direct apportionment of funds. So let's just say, for example, you could say, we want to be able to provide, I don't know, $2 million worth of funds for nonprofit small business to be able to have access to help them recover costs or help the community in some shape, form, or fashion. And we set that pot here, And then that pot could specifically run through a process where we're just saying, we got this much money out there, and we're going to give it out based off, first come, first serve, up to this much money being available. So I know that's kind of the quick and skinny, and we have more time, we can talk about this later, but the idea is that you set some pot of money aside so that you can specifically say, we want to affect the community in this fashion. And then you have a larger pot of funds where you say, through our process of prioritization, from the committee standpoint, from the council standpoint, from the survey standpoint, we want to then have that information vetted through a process of a committee, and we then use a community partner that we will partner with to disperse those funds. So that wouldn't be something that you would have county staff doing. So you kind of take all of that out of the county staff's hands to address those things. So those are kind of things we were talking about related to the application process, and then involving the community. And then one standpoint, you have a committee, and one standpoint, you just have funds in which you've already allocated. And if they're eligible to receive them, they receive them up to a certain amount for as many people, I keep using the term people, as interested parties that can process that application and bring it to the council. So it's a little time left, but I wanted to just kind of throw that out there, and I'll take questions as much as I can in the next 7-8 minutes.
Questions, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Brown, and your thoughts align with some of the things that I was thinking. I guess one thing I would like to put out for council consideration, and I didn't mention it earlier, Ms. Barron, because I only thought of it after a phone call, was as we think through some of these things, I don't know if there will come a point where it might make sense for us to have a work session where we flesh out some of these things, just trying to think through how would we work through this at the committee level and then take it to the council level. It might be that we need to have a more fulsome discussion among all our members so that we're able to bring something forward. That's just something that I put forward for our consideration. I think from my perspective, the approaches that Mr. Brown suggested are harmonious. They're not necessarily in conflict. I guess what I would like to see from a council perspective is, and other members may see things differently, is I would love for us to say, these are the areas, this is how we're going to prioritize it, kind of have some guidelines, whether we have a committee or not, in terms of what are some of the criteria that we're going to use to vet it. Because when you have all these different requests coming in, yes, it's great to have a body that reviews it, but how are we going to be consistent in that? And again, I think it starts with us saying, these are the ways that we want to allocate, whether it's X amount of money for this category or X amount of money from that category. I would love for us to provide that guidance first before we open the floodgates. So I thank you for presenting that to us, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, any further discussion before I chime in here? Well, this is one item that I have shared with administration and many of you. I feel very passionate about that. We have to have a strong process in place when we are putting these funds in, whether it's other governmental entities or even community agencies and partners. And so Ms. Thomas has just got this ingrained in my head that we have to be accountable for every dollar that we put forth, and we take it out of our pocket and put it into someone else's pocket. We have to be accountable. And so I do believe that this item alone deserves more time. Although I'm ready like yesterday to start putting this in action, but realistically speaking, if we're going to do this in excellence, I think that we need to dedicate some time to it. So I am open to a work session so that we can have the full body or those who wish to participate in this. I think it's going to be interesting how we squeeze it in with all of our other budget meetings that's getting ready to take place. But I do think that it's right up there in priority with our strategic plan as well as our budget that's coming forth for the upcoming year. So with that, we'll just look to do a work session from there. And I'm not certain if we need a motion in order to to execute that or not?
No, ma'am, I believe that you had talked about a potential next meeting and maybe that you may use that date and check with the committee and see if maybe that date works with council for a work session, so that we can go ahead and begin to see about dealing with these funds. And,
Oh, excuse me, Mr.
no,
Brown.
excuse me, no, go ahead.
No, and please remind me of that date.
I believe you had mentioned the 22nd. I know it's not something that's been in stone, but I think that's what we
Correct.
potentially looked at.
So for the committee members who are currently, who are present, and my colleagues, Ms. Terratio and Mr. Malinowski, the 22nd, is that amenable as we start to look at a work session?
But did you say a time?
I did not, but I'm thinking that between the 3 and 4 o'clock hour.
Wait,
There's a
You got a lot,
council.
yes,
We-
ma'am.
We
Yes,
have
please.
something?
Yes, ma'am.
It's
3
not on my
p.m., 4
calendar.
p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. and
Oh,
7
yes, it
p.m.
is. Oh, it is, yes. Do we think that, I'm not certain an hour would give us justice? I'm not. And Mr. Brown, what are your thoughts?
I don't believe if you're going to be trying to get the council members to provide you criteria that's going to be used to deal with the whole, I don't know if there will be enough time to get all the input from the magnitude of what we're talking about.
We are looking at possibly a 1 to 3 meeting, but that would make for a long day. I'm not. So why don't we do this just to save on time because we're getting close? And that is, I'll send out an email fleshing out some dates through the clerk's office, and we'll see how we can make sure that we work those items out. So we'll look at a date with the clerk's office and get it out to everyone with that. So are there any, next item on our agenda is other topics? Is there anything that we need to discuss that's pressing?
The only other topic is not related to COVID funds or ARP, but there is a Flora Richland tourism plan drop-in that's from 4 to 6 this afternoon. So if you have time between now and the next council meeting, just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. If nothing further, next item on our agenda is adjournment.
So moved.
Second, Ms. Carrillo?
Barron,
Yes?
Newton,
Yes.
Livingston. Got a quorum? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.